Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Madison here, aka Dandelion. Today we are starting to talk about a topic that I haven't talked about too much here on my channel. We're going to be talking about natural burial. So before we get into natural burial, just a little bit of information about myself so you know why I'm talking about this, what makes me qualified to talk about this. So I am a certified death doula. I have worked at hospices, visiting patients and providing spiritual and emotional mental support, and giving Reiki to hospice patients, which if you don't know what Reiki is, I'll link a video that I've made here on my channel about what Reiki is and how it works. So I'm a certified death doula. I am a hospice volunteer and worker. I also, in the past year and a half, have been working at a natural cemetery here in upstate New York. I am also currently pursuing a degree in gerontology, which is the study of aging, and also thanatology, which is the study of death. So this is something that I'm very well versed in. It's something that I'm learning more and more about every single day through my work that I do and my studies. And the studies that I have done already. That's why I'm here talking about this with you. This is something that I'm very passionate about, something that I think needs to be discussed more. We need more education around aging, death, and dying, and especially practices like natural burial that many people don't even know exist. You can tell from the title of this video what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about burial. We're going to be talking about death. We're going to be talking about everything having to do with those topics. So if this is going to be a difficult video for you, maybe hold off on watching it until you feel a little bit more ready to receive the information. If you're here and you're ready to learn and ready to take it all in and think about this, then welcome to the video. We'll discuss everything we need to about natural burial and it'll be very beneficial for you. But I just want to give a warning. Just from the title, I think I don't really need to give a warning, but just in case, because I respect everyone's emotions, and I know that this can be a very difficult topic to discuss. Just a warning that we will be talking about difficult topics, we will be talking about death, we will be talking about cemeteries, we will be talking about decomposition, we will be talking about death practices, burial practices, so that's what this video is going to be all about. So decide for yourself if you feel ready to watch this right now, and go from there. Last thing before we get into the topic and discuss everything that we have to discuss about natural burial is don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. I upload every single week, sometimes multiple times a week, and there's the occasional live stream mixed in there where I do Q&As and hangout sessions and spiritual support sessions and things like that. So you don't want to miss out on any of those things, so hit that subscribe button, and you can also hit the join button below this video to become a member of my channel and get access to members only perks. So if you're interested in that, hit that join button. So to get into this topic, the first thing I would like to discuss is the difference between conventional burial and traditional burial. This is a distinction that I learned very strongly when I first started working at the cemetery that I work at now. It's a natural cemetery, like I said. We'll get into what that means very soon. But the owner of that cemetery, who's an incredible woman, I absolutely love her, she is a stickler about the definitions of conventional burial versus traditional burial. People often refer to common burial practices that we have in our modern times and have had for the last several hundred years. People often refer to those burial practices as traditional, but actually they are not traditional, they are conventional. So a conventional burial is what we have today. It's what most people do. So a conventional burial is what typically happens is the individual dies, whether it be at home, in hospice, at the hospital, in an accident, whatever the situation may be. The individual dies, the body is taken to a funeral home. Often the body is embalmed. A casket is purchased for the body to be placed in, often a very expensive casket, and the body, the embalmed body is put in the casket. Sometimes if the loved ones of the individual want to have an open casket, the individual will be made up to look as presentable and alive as possible with makeup and hairstyling and processes that are part of the embalming process that make the person look a little bit more alive than they are. And then after a funeral service, the body is buried in the casket, you know, in a hole in the ground in a conventional cemetery, what you think of when you think of a cemetery, with headstones, manicured grass, just headstones right next to each other, no real nature other than the grass. That is a conventional burial. So that is the modern, mainstream, most popular, most widely practiced and accepted type of burial. That is conventional burial. But we know this is not a traditional burial. Traditional meaning tried and true, very old practices of burial. Traditional burial is what was done for the majority of human history. Conventional burial really took off during the Civil War, the United States Civil War. So that's something that I hope to talk about more on my channel here, talking about the history of how burial and death practices have evolved over time. That's something I'm very interested in and is very interesting to learn about and very educational. And I think everyone should have that knowledge so that they can make the proper choices for themselves in their eventual death and for their loved ones when they die. So conventional burial really took off during and after the United States Civil War. This was mostly born out of the fact that a lot of people, a lot of men were dying in battle and needed to be transported back home to be buried. So this is when embalming in particular really became popular and commonplace, to the point where every single person who died was being embalmed. So traditional burial is what humans have been doing for the majority of human history. That is burying the person without embalming, burying the person without a casket, burying the person right into the earth. So conventional burial is more so, you can kind of think about it like conventional burial is more so about preserving the human even in death, protecting them from the elements, protecting them from breaking down and decomposing. Traditional burial is the opposite. Traditional burial is accepting that the individual has died and allowing them to go through the natural process of death and decomposition. So that's an important distinction I first wanted to make. If I say traditional burial or conventional burial, now you'll know what I mean when I say those terms. We already kind of touched on this, talking about what a traditional burial is, but a natural burial is a more traditional burial as opposed to a conventional burial. So a natural cemetery will look like it's not a cemetery at all. You could drive past a natural cemetery on a country road and not even know that you went past a cemetery. Natural cemeteries often just look like the woods or a pasture, a large field of grass. So natural burials are completely natural. It's in the name. There's no manicured landscaping. There's no use of pesticides or use of weed killers. There's no weeding out the plants you don't want. It's all about allowing the nature to be wild and returning those who have died to that naturalness. So if you've ever lost someone in your life and that person after they died had a conventional burial, that's a more modern burial, a more popular, widely practiced kind of burial practice, you'll know from that experience losing that loved one and going to the funeral, and if it was a very close one, going to when they lower the casket into the ground or put the casket into a wall, depending on where the loved one was going. You'll know from witnessing that and experiencing that what that process looks like. But just to run through it quickly so we can compare and contrast these different kinds of burials, so we can understand how natural burial is different. With conventional burials, like I said, the individual dies, they go to a funeral home, they're usually embalmed, they're prepared for a possible open casket, they are placed in a casket, they are lowered into the ground in the casket, and then they are covered with the dirt. And there's typically a tombstone of some kind marking the grave. And conventional cemeteries, which is the majority of cemeteries, are also typically very strict on what you can leave on the grave, what is allowed in the cemetery, Landscaping is very important. You know, the grass is kept mowed and things like that. Plants are not allowed to grow. You cannot plant anything on the grave typically. Some places even, and then, you know, lots of cemeteries are different. They all have different rules, but this is just generally how it goes. With natural burial, it's very different. So natural burial, the individual dies. One thing that is the same is typically the body of the individual who died will temporarily go to a funeral home just to be held until they're ready for burial. But they are not embalmed. Natural burial involves no chemicals, no formaldehyde, no manipulating or impacting the body in any sort of way. So after the individual has died, the decomposition process is not interrupted. The only thing that is done to the body is any spiritual rites that that person or their loved ones might want done. So if there's if they're a part of any sort of religion, they would have any kind of spiritual rites that they want done for the body. The body is wrapped in a shroud. So there are many different ways to shroud a body. I'll put some images here. So there are many different ways to wrap a body in a shroud. Typically, natural fibers are used. So again, the whole point is you don't want to put anything in the ground for a natural burial that will not decompose. So for a natural burial, we might wrap the body in linen, we might wrap the body in cotton, anything that's going to decompose easily, nothing synthetic. So the body is wrapped in a shroud, and then it's held at the funeral home until it's time for the person's burial and funeral. The natural cemetery I work at, and this is how most natural cemeteries do it, but again, every cemetery is different. So if you have a natural cemetery near you, then you can always call them or look at their website to find out more about how exactly they do things, but it'll probably be very similar to what I'm about to describe. So once it is the day of the funeral and the body is going to be buried, the body is brought from the funeral home to the natural cemetery. It is placed on some sort of cart, just with wheels that has to be manually wheeled. The body is placed on a cart, and the body is transported on that cart to the burial site, which is typically, you know, along a dirt path or into the trees or into the pasture, away from the road, into more of the woods or whatever the natural environment is. So the body is moved to the gravesite. The loved ones or anyone who is there to attend the funeral and the burial, they will accompany the cart or sometimes even pull the cart themselves to the gravesite. So there's something so it's more personal, it's more connected. It's not like with a conventional burial where everything is done by the funeral workers and the loved ones have absolutely no involvement. This kind of natural, traditional burial is more suited to allowing the grieving process to naturally happen. It's very helpful in aiding the grieving process because the loved ones of that individual who has died are actively participating in it. And when you, as a worker at a natural cemetery, when you witness the walk from the parking lot, the office where the body is on the cart, where the loved ones arrive to the cemetery, the walk from there with the body to the site is an incredibly beautiful thing. It's very emotional. It's a send-off. It is, again, it's traditional. It's what humans have been doing for thousands and thousands of years until the death industry got much more monetizable. But that's a separate video. So more on that in the future. So before the loved ones even get there, and often before the body even arrives at the cemetery for burial, workers like myself and the other people who work at the cemetery will prepare the gravesite. So wherever the body is going to be buried, a hole is measured out and dug. It's dug with machinery before the family gets there. We'll make sure that the land around the site is suitable for people to walk on or even sit on. So we'll fill in any holes that people might trip in. We'll clear away any large rocks. and will usually dress the site to make it more beautiful. It's already very beautiful because you're out in nature, so it's naturally very beautiful and peaceful and serene. But we will typically walk around nearby, find some wildflowers or anything that's blossoming nearby, pick some stuff, or grab anything that has fallen from trees or from bushes or from plants, and bring that to the site to dress around the grave and make it very beautiful. Often at the cemetery I work at, we have a lot of pine trees around us, different kinds of pine trees. So we often take branches from those pine trees and we will lay them on the bottom of the grave, almost as like a soft bed or a soft mattress for the person who has died to be laying on and resting on in the grave. And then we will also put them around the grave with whatever other plants are currently in bloom, depending on the season. Also, depending on, every funeral is different. Every funeral is customized to the loved one and to the deceased person and their loved ones. So every single funeral at a natural cemetery looks different. But sometimes, if needed, depending on how many people are coming and the wishes of the loved ones of the deceased, we might lay out chairs. We might put out a tent if it's supposed to rain. We also place planks of wood with spikes into the ground along the long sides of the grave. This is so when people are stepping up to the grave to lower the body into the ground, which is something that's often done at least partially, if not completely, by the loved ones. Again, allowing the loved ones to be more a part of the burial process and not just witnesses while the cemetery workers do all the work for them. There's more of a connection and involvement. So these planks next to the long ends of the grave help to make sure that no one trips, that no one falls, that the ground is steady beneath their feet when it's time to lower the body. Because the body is lowered without machinery, it's lowered with straps, and individuals slowly lower the loved one down into the grave using the straps. So again, it's very inclusive, it's very connecting. It's all about being involved in the process as opposed to stepping back from it and having a kind of cold separation. So that all happens before the body arrives, before the loved ones arrive, and then sometimes loved ones before we take the body to the gravesite. Once the body is placed on the cart, the body's wrapped in a shroud, it's on a plank of wood. There was one time at the natural cemetery I work at that instead of a plank of wood, it was a wicker basket. It was so beautiful. It was a hand-woven wicker basket that was the shape of a human body, with no lid, no cover. And the body was placed in there in the shroud. It was so beautiful. But typically most of the time it's just a plank of wood, a very nice plank of wood, that the body in a shroud is placed on, and then that's placed on the cart. And then family will often, again, bring flowers, and flowers can be placed into the shroud, kind of sticking out all over. Again, I'll try to find a photo, but it's so beautiful. When you see it, the loved ones placing, and this is, again, that connection to the deceased, because the loved ones are often touching the body through the shroud, but touching the body to place the flowers into the shroud. It's so beautiful. And often loved ones will come up to the body and touch it to say goodbye, just to get one last connection with that body before it goes into the ground. So then the cemetery workers, along with the loved ones, cart the body to the gravesite, depending on who the person is and who their loved ones are and any communities or religions that they might be a part of. This walk can look very different. The most recent burial I worked at was for a Jewish woman. So as they walked, they did some Jewish chants and sang some Jewish songs. It was very beautiful. There was once a burial at the cemetery that was an indigenous person, and there was the entire community of indigenous people was there. So they chanted and sang their cultural songs as they walked her to the grave. Other people wished to be silent and to just, be with themselves and think and be present in the moment. And the walk is very quiet. So other people, they chat as they go with the other loved ones that are there for the funeral, and they reminisce about things and they share stories as we walk. So everybody's different. Everybody's different. Once we get to the gravesite, the body is moved off of the cart and onto the top of the grave. So it's not lowered into the grave yet. You see, again, I'll try to find a photo. Remember I said we place planks on either side of the long ends of the grave with stakes in the ground to hold them there. And then we place 2 planks of wood perpendicular to those planks to create a place where the body can rest on top of the grave before it is lowered into the ground. So the body is placed on top of the grave, on top of these planks. And then the funeral service takes place. Again, this is unique to the individual, unique to the deceased and the loved ones that are in attendance. Sometimes it's very quick and short and not much is done or said. Sometimes there's 1 person in attendance, sometimes there's 100. It just depends on the person and the circumstance. So sometimes eulogies are said, sometimes songs are sung, sometimes little certain religious or spiritual ceremonies are performed, poems are read. I've seen all different kinds of things. And sometimes there's an officiant if the person is a part of a organized religion. Other times the family members just run it themselves and they don't have any person really officially running the service. So they just go through it themselves and they lead it themselves. So again, it's very personalized to the individual and their loved ones. Once any service has been completed, the body is lowered into the ground. And again, this is usually done by the loved ones. So the loved ones and the workers do it if the loved ones don't want to do it, or if there aren't enough loved ones and they need a worker to pop in to help, because you need 4 people to do it. So the people who are lowering the body into the ground, whether that be the loved ones or the workers of the cemetery or both, they will grab the straps on either side of the body. Workers from the cemetery will pull the perpendicular planks that the body was resting on out from underneath the plank that the body's on, and the body, using the straps, is slowly lowered into the grave. And then once this happens, sometimes a few more words are said. Sometimes families feel ready to go after that happens. They say their final goodbyes and they leave the cemetery. Other loved ones prefer to aid in covering the body with dirt. So at a natural cemetery, we'll have shovels for any loved ones who want to shovel a scoop of dirt into the grave. This, again, is about connecting to the grieving experience, connecting to the deceased, processing the loss. This is all about that connection and that involvement that you get in traditional natural burial that you don't get in conventional modern burial, where there's sort of a separation. If any loved ones want to come up and shovel a bit of dirt into the grave, then they do so. A lot of people also like to drop flowers into the grave, so some people do that. And usually either us as the workers or the family members will do this. We will have extra pine branches to place on top of the body, almost as like a blanket. So we'll do that at the end too. And then once everything is done and the family is leaving, the workers will use shovels to cover the body, typically until you can't see the body anymore, but the hole is not completely filled. And then they have machinery that comes and finishes covering the hole and filling it in completely. One difference between natural burial, traditional burial, and conventional burial is at a conventional gravesite, the ground is flat. It is leveled to be flat with all the ground around it, and then it's made sure with grass seed and whatever else that the grass grows on top of the grave and it becomes flat, and you can't even tell that there was ever a hole. If there wasn't a tombstone or a marker on the grave, you wouldn't even know there was a grave there because the ground is flat. At a natural cemetery, there are mounds where the grave is. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, You could walk through or drive past a natural cemetery and have no clue that you just walked through or drove past a cemetery, because it's very natural, it's very wild. It's not manicured in the way that modern cemeteries, conventional cemeteries are. So the one way, if you have a trained eye and you know about natural cemeteries and you know about natural burial, that you can identify a grave at a natural cemetery is the mound. So at the natural cemetery that I work at, you can identify where the graves are. They're marked with stakes a lot of the time if they're fresh, just to kind of let everyone know, hey, don't walk here, this is still settling. One thing that we'll talk more about in a minute is often loved ones will have plants of some kind, whether they be bushes or flowers or trees, a lot of the time is what people do. They'll have those planted on top of the gravesite. So often, instead of a tombstone or a conventional marker, they'll have a tree or a bush or flowers or something like that. So the way you can identify, oh, that's a burial right there. That's, somebody's buried there, is the mound. So there'll be a little patch of raised earth where the grave was placed. So that's how you can identify that. And some of the sites, again, this is all personal to the individual and their loved ones, what they want done. Some sites have a marker, a flat rock as a marker. These are always from rocks that are found on the property. So anytime we as workers find a good size flat stone, we are sure to grab it, and then we place it in the office. And anytime someone needs a marker made, you can take that stone, that naturally found stone, and have it engraved. This is much cheaper than paying for some kind of fancy from a store gravestone. So these are rocks that are found in the natural area of the cemetery and then just engraved with the name and anything else that the loved ones want, date of birth and death, and any little sayings or words that they want placed on the stone. So some people do that. Not everyone does that. A lot of the sites at the cemetery I work at are not marked in that way. They just have plants that are marking them, like trees and things like that, young trees that have recently been planted. So that's another way that natural burial allows the deceased and the loved ones to kind of personalize what's best for them and what they wish to have. So that is the gist of what natural burial looks like and how it's different than conventional burial, modern burial practices. If you have any questions at all about anything that I just described, please comment them down below. I will be making sure to keep an eye on the comments on this video to answer any questions that you might have. I know many people may be finding this video because they're preparing for the death of a loved one, or maybe even they're thinking about what they want for themselves one day when they die. So this is why I'm making this video. I want people to be informed that this is an option. If you don't love the idea of a conventional modern burial for yourself in a modern cemetery and you want something more natural, maybe you don't want to be embalmed, maybe you don't want to be row by row next to other people who have died. Maybe you want more peace and more serenity and more connection with nature. Natural burial is an option. It's a great option. Or maybe even you're looking for something that's not as expensive. Natural burial is much more cost effective than conventional burial. So let's talk a little bit about why someone would choose a natural burial. We just touched on it a little bit. We're going to get into it more. So what are the benefits of natural burial? Why do people choose natural burial over conventional burial? So the first one is obvious. It's in the name. Natural burial is more natural. So this is perfect for people who love nature, for people who want to be connected to nature, for people who have a spiritual connection to nature or a religious connection to nature, people who want to be a part of that cycle of life, death, and rebirth, people who want to allow their body to naturally decompose into the soil around them, people who are just, they love nature and they want to be connected to it in the afterlife, even in death. So that is a huge positive for natural burial. You're not going to be in a box. You're going to be directly touching the earth. I would say the biggest positive for natural burial is that it's less expensive. Anyone who has lost someone that they love knows how expensive it is to die, which is a ridiculous truth. I hope to be a vehicle for change in this aspect of our society throughout my life, through my work as a death doula and a thanatologist. The monetization of death is, in my opinion, disgusting. Death is not something that you can opt in or out of. Death is not something that you can say, oh, I don't want to spend money on that. I'm not going to do it. Dying is expensive. You know what? I'm just not going to die. You can't do that. Everybody's going to die. And conventional burial is very expensive, especially depending on what that individual wants done with their body. Caskets are very expensive, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, depending on the choice you make. Embalming costs money, and it's almost never necessary. The only time embalming is necessary, and I'm going to make a whole video about embalming, so we can talk about this more, because it's important information that everyone should have, and very few people do. Embalming is only necessary if the body needs to be transported to where it's being buried, and it's going to take some time. If your loved one dies at home, or in hospice, or at the hospital, or in their hometown, near the cemetery they're going to be buried in, or whatever they're doing with their body, and the funeral home tells you that they need to be embalmed, or that they should be embalmed, or sometimes funeral homes will tell you that it is illegal to not embalm, that it is required by law to embalm the loved one that has died, this is false. This is false. Embalming is not required by law. Embalming is entirely optional, and embalming costs money. So often funeral homes will try to sell you that you need to embalm your loved one. They'll give you all these reasons. They're not real. You do not need to embalm your loved one. Again, we will talk about this more in a separate video where we'll talk all about embalming. But embalming is another expense, another unnecessary, usually, expense. So unless there is a reason for the embalming is not necessary, and it's an unnecessary cost. So you've got the cost of the plot. You've got the cost of the casket. You've got the cost of the funeral home services. So this is a lot of money. This is expensive. This is very expensive. And with natural burial, you're not embalming unless you have an extenuating circumstance. You have to pay for the plot, but often the plot is not as expensive as it is at a conventional cemetery, so it's not quite as expensive. You have to pay for the plot. You're not paying for a casket, so that saves you thousands of dollars. You're not paying for embalming, and you're not paying for a tombstone. If you decide to engrave a stone at the natural cemetery, it is much, 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 much cheaper than a conventional tombstone or grave marker that you would get at a conventional cemetery. So everything about natural burial is more affordable, more cost effective, and it helps. It's a step in the right direction for demonetizing the death industry. So that is a huge positive for natural cemeteries and natural burial. The last positive that we're going to touch on is that natural burial is good for the environment. It's very good for the environment. Decomposition is an important part of the life cycle, especially for the natural world. When a tree dies in the woods, it begins to grow mushrooms. It becomes a home for birds. It becomes something that the woodpeckers can enjoy. It becomes a place for an owl to live. It becomes a place for bugs to thrive. It becomes a place where fungi grow. So death has a role to play in the natural world. Death is not some kind of negative thing. Death is natural, just as life is natural. Life creates death, and death creates life. So this is a beautiful aspect of natural burial, that We're protecting the earth, and we're also protecting our bodies. We're also honoring the cycle of life and death and rebirth. And natural cemeteries are kept wild as part of the natural cemetery. And therefore, that part of the earth that is within the boundaries of the natural cemetery's property is protected. The trees won't be harmed, the grass won't be harmed, the plants won't be harmed, the animals won't be harmed, and that is a beautiful thing. So if you're a person who cares about the environment, who cares about protecting our natural world, who cares about protecting the land, who cares about climate change, natural burial is a great option for you, because your body will be protecting that piece of earth even in death, which I think is so beautiful. So if all of this has made you think that maybe natural burial is something that you want for yourself one day when you die, or it's something that you think a loved one might be interested in or might be the right choice for them, or maybe you've lost someone and you don't know where to put them and what to do with their body, then look for a natural cemetery near you. You can just look up natural cemeteries near me, see what comes up, research them through their website. Again, give them a call, ask them your questions. They're there for you to ask questions. So don't feel like you shouldn't, have too many questions, or you feel like you might have a stupid question. Not possible. Ask them all your questions. Again, you can comment here on this video if you have any questions about anything that I've said, and I'll be happy to explain further. But look around. Even if you don't think you have a natural cemetery near you, you might. And even if you have to go a little bit of a distance away, an hour away from your home or something like that, it's worth it. If this is something that you want, then do what you need to do to make it happen. If this is the ideal situation for you or a loved one that you've lost or will lose in the future, then this is worth putting the extra effort in if you have to drive a little bit to the cemetery. Often natural cemeteries are out in the wilderness, so if you live in a city, you're going to have to go outside of the city for a natural cemetery. For me, I live a little bit more in the woods. The natural cemetery that I work at is about an hour away from my home. But it's a nice country drive on very pretty roads. So it's an enjoyable drive. So natural cemeteries are a little bit more in the wilderness. That's the point. They're natural. So you might have to go a little out of your way for it, but I'm sure that you have one at least a few hours away from you at the very most. That is all I have to share with you today about natural burial and the natural burial process. I hope that this was helpful to anyone who's watching this. I hope that you feel like you have a better understanding of your options in terms of conventional burial versus traditional natural burial. If you have any questions at all, leave those in the comments and I will answer you as soon as possible. If you're watching this and you've lost a loved one, I am sending you all my love. Part of the beauty of natural burial is that it makes the process easier. It makes the process more of a positive experience and less of a negative, painful experience. Of course, there will always be pain when someone has died and there is grief and there is loss, but the pain doesn't have to be negative. The pain can be part of the love. And I think natural cemeteries and natural burial is all about that. That's the practice of natural burial is all about connection to the deceased, connection to your grief, connection to the dying process, and that is a beautiful thing. And you will get so much out of it. If you decide to participate in natural burial, whether it be volunteering at a natural cemetery, getting a job at a natural cemetery, or choosing natural burial for yourself, or maybe you have a loved one who's choosing natural burial for themselves, it's a beautiful experience. And I can definitely say, as a person who works at a natural cemetery, that you will not regret the choice that you made. You will get a lot of beautiful, positive, healing love from the practice of natural burial. So thank you so much for watching. If you're grieving, my heart is with you, and I will see you soon here on my channel. Goodbye.